So hello everyone. So this is CA Sanidhya Saraf, your friend, mentor, and coach for audit. So I have decided finally to bring out the Inter Audit audio clips for the students for South India. So what you have to do is chapter by chapter I will be providing you voice clips in English language, and you just have to hear those voice clips in your idle time, and you will see that you have actually started to gain that confidence in audit, right? So I believe every one of you is ready. So the first chapter that I'm going to provide you is nature, objective, and scope of audit. Do remember the standards of auditing part in every chapter I shall be providing separately in standards, and the non-standards part I shall be providing in the chapters. So talking about nature, objective, and scope of audit. So first of all, the first question that we need to keep in mind is what is auditing and what is the difference between auditing and investigation. So now you see, when we talk about audit, we all know that audit is an examination of financial information. But the important thing is that audit is not just an examination of financial information, it's an independent examination of financial information. And that can be of any entity, whether profit making or not, irrespective of its size or legal structure. And what is the objective of audit? To form an opinion. Now, the person conducting this task of doing auditing has to ensure that financial statements are not misleading anyone. Okay. Now, how will the person ensure that the financial statements are not misleading? So, this is one question that can come in the exam. So, he will ensure by satisfying himself that the books of account, the financial statements that have been made or the accounts that have been drawn, that has actually been drawn as per the entries in the books. Each and every entry in the books of accounts, they are supported by sufficient evidences. None of the entries in the books of accounts should actually be omitted in the process of compilation, because if anything is omitted, then it means that the books of accounts itself is not incomplete, so the financial statement itself is wrong. Auditor will also ensure that the information conveyed by the financial statement is very clear, unambiguous, and the financial statement is properly classified, properly disclosed as per the AS, and reflected true and fair view. So this is what he has to ensure. Do remember that this particular concept of auditing is not new. The reference to this term auditing was found in Kautilya's Arthashastra even in 4th century BC. And the word auditor originates from the Latin word audir, O-U-D-I-R, which means to hear. And the first Auditor General of India, the concept of Auditor General of India. So that was actually appointed by British India in 1860 itself. And we know that in 1949 ICI was formed. Now, what is the difference between audit and investigation? So, see, audit is a general examination, but investigation is a critical examination of the accounts with a specific purpose. So, investigation will always have a specific purpose, right? And when we talk about audit, the objective is only to give reasonable assurance, but in investigation, we have to give the absolute assurance. And as an auditor, we don't have the powers of investigation. Our objective is very general in nature, but in investigation, the objective is very specific. The powers in audit are also curtailed as compared to investigation. Now, the next topic is there are two types of audit. One is mandatory audits, and other is voluntary audits. See, the mandatory audits are called as statutory audits, that companies are actually required to get their accounts audited. But there is another form of audits called as voluntary audits. So basically what happens is that in case of many entities like the proprietary entities, partnership firms, HUF, audit is not mandatory. They can get their accounts audited as a matter of, as a matter of option. So they can actually get their accounts audited to achieve the advantages of audit. It is not mandatory for them. And these two terms together, mandatory audit and voluntary audit, it is also called as external audit. We also call it as external audit. So that is also something you need to keep in mind. Then, what are the objectives of audit and what is the scope of audit? So this particular topic, that what are the objectives of audit and what is the scope of audit, this is actually covered in essay 200. That is overall objective of the independent auditor and the conduct of an audit in accordance with standards of auditing. So the overall objective of the auditor is to ensure that he has to give a reasonable assurance. Reasonable assurance means a assurance that is a high degree of assurance but not absolute assurance. So it is a reasonable assurance. The auditor has to give reasonable assurance that the financial statements are free from material misstatements. At the same time, he has to report whether the financial statements are true and fair. Now, what will come in the scope of audit? So see, it is very logical. Audit should be organized in such a manner that auditor is able to cover all the aspects of the entity that is relevant to the financial statements being audited. Secondly, he is required to evaluate that the data contained in accounting records, whether they are reliable or not, whether they are sufficient or not, and the judgments exercised by the management are proper or not. So all this comes within the scope of audit. Then auditor should ensure whether there are proper disclosures made in the financial statements, whether the judgment made by the management is appropriate, whether the accounting policies followed by the management is appropriate. So everything comes within the scope of the auditor. Now, what does not come within the scope of the audit? So basically, auditor is not expected to do the works that an investigator is supposed to do. An audit is not an official investigation. Plus, auditor is not expected to perform duties outside his competence. For example, he is not supposed to determine physical condition of a certain asset like a sophisticated machinery. That is the work of the engineer, not of a auditor. Also, auditor is not an expert in authentication of documents. So he cannot certify, he cannot examine whether the documents are genuine, whether the documents are original, because he is not an expert in this field. So these are few of the things which does not comes in the scope of audit. Clear? Then there are a few qualities of auditor that is given. So see, there are some personal qualities which an auditor should have, and there are some professional qualities. When we talk about personal qualities, he should be tactful, he should exercise caution everywhere, he should be a person with good temper, he should exercise judgment everywhere, he should be patient enough, he should be a reliable person. So all these are personal qualities. He should be a person of integrity. When we talk about professional qualities, then we have integrity, we have independence, we have education, we have professional training, we have the knowledge of accounting. All these are professional qualities. And knowledge of accounting is a must for an auditor. It is said that exhaustive knowledge of accounting is the sine qua non. Sine qua non, they have used the word expression sine qua non, SINEQUANON, of the practice of auditing. Right. Then the next question is relationship of auditing with other disciplines. So basically, audit has a relationship with accounting. They are closely related, because ultimately auditor reviews the financial statements that is the result of accounting process. Then there is a relationship with law. Again, the relationship between auditing and law is very close. Auditor should have good knowledge of the Companies Act, the business law, the direct tax law, the indirect tax law. Then auditor is also expected to have relationship. Auditing is also expected to have relationship with economics. So auditor is expected to be familiar with the economic environment as well. Then there is a relationship between auditing and behavioral science. So behavioral science is another subject that is closely connected with the subject of audit. Because you see, in the course of audit, auditor is required to interact with a lot of people in the organization. So that is why it is quite important that he should have that knowledge of human behavior. Then audit of statistics and mathematics. Auditor should also have knowledge of statistics and mathematics. Then only he can, choose the right samples, he may perform recalculations and everything. Then there is a relationship between auditing and data processing. So nowadays, accounting is done with the help of IT. So audit should also be, carried out with the help of computers. That is what we call it as EDP audit, electronic data processing audit. Then there is a relationship between auditing and financial management. That is, auditor is expected to have knowledge about various financial techniques, such as the different FM topics, you can say, like the capital management, fund flow, ratio analysis, capital vesting. And finally, there is a relationship between auditing and production. So auditor should have good knowledge about the production process of the client, like the cost system, the marketing, everything. Now the next topic is who appoints the auditor. So you see, that actually depends whether it is a case of government company or it is a case of non-government company. If we talk about government companies, the first auditors are appointed by the board of directors and subsequently they are appointed by the members in the general meeting. But if we talk about the government companies, other than government companies, the first auditors are appointed by BOD, subsequently they are appointed by the members. But in case of government companies, there is one authority which appoints the auditors, that is the CAG, Comptroller Auditor General of India. Again, the report is submitted to the person who did the appointment. Now you do remember, when we talk about the different kind of services that a CA perform, a CA can perform either assurance services or he can perform non-assurance services. Okay. Now there are three kind of assurance services. The first is audit, second is review, and third is other assurance services. So now when he performs audit, that is one of the assurance services for which standards of auditing is applicable. That is SA 100 to 800 series. Then suppose he performs review, then in that situation SRE 2400 series is applicable. And when he performs other assurance services, then in that situation SAE 3400 series is applicable, that is standards on assurance engagement 3400 series is applicable. There are non-assurance services also that is CA provides, that is standard on related services, some related services. For that SRS is applicable, that is standards on related services is applicable. So when we talk about audit, that's one of the assurance services. In audit, you know that we give reasonable assurance. There is another thing called as review. Now, just like audit, review is also done of the historical financial statement, and in review we actually give limited assurance, which is less than the reasonable assurance, right? And we also give a kind of negative assurance. We perform limited procedures in review. So in that SRE 2400 series is applicable. Then we talk about other assurance services. So basically these are those assurance services which applies other than HFS, means other than historical financial statement. For example, you are giving some assurance on internal control, or for example, you are giving some assurance on projected financial statements that is based on assumptions. In that also you give a kind of a moderate assurance or a negative assurance. And then we have the related services that you perform, that are non-assurance services. For example, you might assist the client with the compilation of the books, so that's a related service. For that, SRS is applicable, in which we give no assurance. Now, all of this combined are called as engagement and quality control standards. All of this combined are called as engagement and quality control standards, and there are also SQC's standards on quality controls that is applicable for all of them. The basic objective of SQC is to ensure that there is a minimum set of quality control requirement that should be applicable for each of them. Now you see, there is a topic of assurance engagement that is given in the module. Now when we talk about assurance engagement, it means we are talking about audit, if we are talking about reviews, we are talking about other than HFS, we are talking about everything. We are not only talking about audit. So when we are talking about the concept of assurance engagement, do remember that there are few elements of assurance engagement. Firstly, we will not be using the word auditor when we talk about assurance engagement, we'll rather be using the word practitioner. Then instead of using the word management, we'll use the word responsible party, then we'll be using the word intended users. We'll not use the word financial statement, rather we'll use the word subject matter. We'll not use the word financial reporting framework, we'll rather use the word suitable criteria. Then instead of saying audit evidence, we'll say sufficient appropriate evidence. So few things you remember. Now what are the elements of assurance engagement? First is there is a three-party relationship between a practitioner, responsible party and intended user. So practitioner is that person who is giving the assurance, the term is broader than the auditor. Responsible party is the person who is responsible for making the subject matter. Intended users are the persons for whom the assurance report is made. Then we have appropriate subject matter. Appropriate subject matter actually refers to the information that the practitioner is going to examine while giving the assurance. Then we have the suitable criteria. Suitable criteria is basically the benchmarks that the practitioner is going to see while giving the assurance, like different standards, guidance. Then we have another element, sufficient appropriate evidence. Do remember that is sufficient appropriate evidence and not sufficient appropriate audit evidence. And finally, we have a written assurance report. Do remember that is a written assurance report, not a written audit report. So these are the different elements of assurance engagement. Then difference between audit versus review we have already discussed. Now, if we talk about different types of assurance engagement, first of all, there can be a reasonable assurance engagement that is called as the audit. Secondly, there can be a limited assurance engagement that is called as the review. You know that in a reasonable assurance engagement, that is the audit, auditor performs extensive procedures, but in limited assurance engagement, that is the review, fewer procedures are performed. In reasonable assurance engagements, that is audit, we draw reasonable conclusions, and in limited assurance engagement, that is review, we draw limited conclusions. And thirdly, we have assurance engagements other than historical financial statements. Like suppose we are giving assurance on the internal controls, or suppose we are giving assurance on the prospective financial information. Now, if we are talking about prospective financial information, basically this information is based on future. Prospective financial information means companies making a projection about future, that in the next 4-5 years, let us say how much we are going to earn. So that will be based on assumptions and events. Right, that will be based on assumptions and events. So this will relate to the future events. So the evidence also that will be available, those will be futuristic evidences, those will be future oriented evidences, and so it is very difficult for us to give any kind of opinion. So auditor here will not give a reasonable assurance, he will rather give a moderate assurance or a negative assurance. So he will not say that okay, the assumptions are fine, the assumptions used for forecasted information is fine. He will rather say that nothing has come to our knowledge which suggests that the assumptions are not fine. So he will use a negative tone, because it is very difficult to give a convincing assurance for such kind of engagements. Clear? So this is what you have to remember. And finally, the topic is, why are these standards needed? Why are these standards of auditing needed? So first of all, these standards, what they are based on global practices, right? They are based on global practices. So the standards ensure that audit is being carried against benchmarks at par with global practices. Secondly, if we follow the standards, we'll point out the mistakes and automatically the quality of financial reporting will increase. Thirdly, these standards will promote uniformity. Fourthly, our knowledge will increase, the knowledge of professional accountants will increase. And finally, the audit quality will be enhanced. So these are the different reasons why standards are needed. There are some duties we need to perform with regard to the engagement quality control standards. That is, first of all, we need to ensure compliance of this standard, but it may not be always possible that we can perform each and every requirement of the standard. There might be some specific procedure that we are not able to perform in some specific situation. For example, as a 5101 says that we have to attend physical verification, we might not be able to attend physical verification for some practical reason. So in that situation, we shall perform alternative procedures and clearly mention the reason for departure, clearly document the reason for departure. Just mentioning about the departure will not reduce your responsibility. You have to clearly mention about the reason of the departure. So this is all that you have to remember in this particular chapter, that is nature, objective and scope of audit. In the ICS study material, you will see that SA 200 was also covered in this particular chapter, but that we shall be doing separately in the standards of auditing part. One more thing, suppose you are looking for a full-fledged English course that is available at apnamentor.com, my website, at very reasonable price, only at 1499 with ebooks. And then there is 2799 with hard copy notes. Might be that when you visit the website, the prices may increase also, because this is the discounted prices that is available currently. When you visit the website, practically after hearing the audio note, might be the price might have increased also. And for any guidance that you need from my side, you can just WhatsApp me at 863-858-5920. You can just note the number. All the best.